Okay, this week is a portion of Miketz. We'd read in last week's parsha how Yosef had interpreted the dreams of the Saramashkim, the wine steward, and he had said two words as a result of the interpretation of the dream. He said, "Remember me and mention me." That when you be reinstated as the wine steward to Paro, remember me for what I did for you, the favor that I provided, and mention me. And Torah says 3 days later, he was reinstated, and Torah says, Vayishkocheyu. It's not he didn't remember him. Yishkocheyu means he forgot him. He intentionally forgot him. He just pushed it out of his mind. And the Midrash, Rashi cites the pasuk from Tehillim that you should never rely and put your faith into heathens. And because Yosef had relied on this heathen, this Egyptian, rather than a Hashem, a God himself, so for each word, he had spent another year in prison. Initially, he was in prison only for 10 years in the dungeon. And because these two words were an expression of a lack of faith, for each year, for each word, he spent another year in prison. So altogether, he was 12 years in prison. Exactly when the 2 years were up, to the moment, Paro begins dreaming. And as we'll discuss, the dreams actually were very disturbing to him. And all his dream interpreters, the wise men, no one was able to have any ability to give him any understanding of this. And finally, the Saramashkim pipes up and he says, I'm willing, I want to mention my original sin. And and he tells over the whole story, how he was in prison and there was this lowly Jew, slave, so on and so forth, which we'll discuss. And he interpreted my dream and the dream of the baker, and it was exactly accurate as he interpreted. I was reinstalled, I was reinstated, and the baker was hanged. Exactly. He immediately is summoned from the prison, and within moments, he rises to the level of Viceroy of Egypt. He becomes the Viceroy of Egypt. And Paro and his courtiers and his wise men are so amazed that they've never seen such genius as Yosef's genius. Within a moment, after presenting the problem that's being forecasted, he has an immediate solution. And that will save the country. Not only save the country, it will put Egypt at a level that all the wealth of the world will be actually accumulated in Egypt to that degree. And Paro's reaction to Yosef's elucidation of the problem or solution of the problem, he says, have you ever seen anyone who's sheish ruach elokimbo? He has a spirit of godliness. This is not human genius. This is divine genius. And this is why he was appointed to be the Viceroy of Egypt. He had all the power. And Paro makes a statement. Rakat kise egdol mibeko. Only in name as king, I'll be above you. But in terms of every other decision which relates to this country, it's your decision. You're the first and final word. That's a result of this interpretation of the dream. Now, after Yosef interprets the dream of this Egyptian, immediately he says to him, when the Egyptian realized that it's a correct interpretation, he says to him, remember me and mention me. Because I was innocent, I was stolen from my family, and I was sold as a slave, and so on and so forth. Is what he says. Why Did he have to say it immediately? After he interpreted the dream of the baker, maybe he should have waited a little bit. There's an expression when the iron is hot, strike. Yosef understood the nature of this Egyptian, that he's a bad man. Even average people, we say, have short memories. How quickly does a person forget a favor? Nobody wants to be a debtor. The only reason why a debtor naturally pays his debt is because there's a certain degree of conscience. You're a debtor, you should pay. But if immediately there is no conscience, a sense of conscience to meet the debt, because the person doesn't really want to be a debtor, it goes to the wayside. Shlomo tells us in Mishlei, Eved lo v'lish malveh. When a person borrows, he's indebted to the lender, literally like an Eved, like a slave. A person lends someone money, and the borrower says to the lender, come pick up your money if you want it. Unacceptable. The debtor has an obligation to go to the lender and pay the debt, even though it was never discussed who's coming to. Why? Because the debtor is indebted to the lender. Eved lo v'lish malveh, literally like a slave. Because at that level of indebtedness, you must go out of your way, regardless of the inconvenience, to go and repay the debt to the lender. You're indebted. The Sarah Mashkim understands, not because Shlomo had said anything. He's indebted to Yosef. And Yosef doesn't want him to forget his level of indebtedness, to what degree he's indebted. Here, a moment ago, you were depressed. You had no idea. And it was even worse than that, because he had dreamt the interpretation of the baker's dream, that he was the one to be killed. So when Yosef interpreted his dream that he will live, it was like a relief. He had a new lease on life. So what did he provide for him? He put him in a whole different mindset. He's going to be reinstated to his original glory. So what he provided, his interpretation, provided something very valuable. Immediately, he doesn't want him to forget that, what he provided, and therefore immediately, he doesn't wait a moment. He says, remember me and mention me for that reason. But Vayishkacheyu, he forgot him. Now, why, we're not even going to speak about why Yosef, why it's a failure on Yosef's part. But why didn't the wine steward mention him? Why? Why not? I mean, it's a debt. It's not anything out of your pocket. Now, the wine steward, the way I always learned, which I can tell you differently in a moment, which I saw Orach Chaim HaKodesh over Shabbos, understood, we find something very interesting about Yosef. Yosef sold into slavery. He sold to Potiphar. That's his master. Within no time, Potiphar recognizes this man has something special. He understands God is with him. So Rashi over there explains, why does he realize God is with him? Because even though he's a slave and he's living in a pagan society, the name of Hashem is always in his mouth. He's always mentioning, attributing everything to Hashem. And all of a sudden, the master sees a level of wealth and success, which is out of the ordinary. And he attributes all that success because Yosef's level of connection to God. Within no time, the Torah tells us that Yosef was running and oversaw all the financial affairs of Potiphar. The only thing he was totally out of touch with all his financial affairs. The only thing he had to do was with his wife. He rose immediately to the very top. That's Yosef. Then all of a sudden, the story follows. His wife had her eye on him. She tried to seduce him. And afterwards, because she believed that she'd be caught, that she was actually the seducer, she defamed him, that he tried to rape her. immediately he's thrown into prison, into a dungeon. How long is he in the dungeon before he becomes the equivalent of the warden? Immediately, he rises to the top. The warden has no idea what's going on in the prison. Yosef is running the prison. Yosef immediately rises to the top. And he is the personal valet of these two ministers of Paro's court, the Saramashkim and Sarahofim. So the Saramashkim understood Yosef's ability. He had a capacity which was unheard of. And being a minister in the court of Paro, he's not an ordinary person. He has a full grasp and understanding of Yosef's capability. You know, every person who's in a position of power, for whatever reason, he doesn't want to share that power with anyone, although it's not his area. But he understood if Yosef is recognized who he is, he will become his master. He'll even rise to a level of the almost equivalent of the king. He's not going to have Yosef oversee him and dictate his life. Therefore, he intentionally put it out of his mind. As much as Yosef didn't want him to forget that it should be on his conscience, he actually forced it out of his mind. He pushed it out of his mind. Because since he felt he'd become the underling, if Yosef should be recognized who he is, there's no way he's mentioning Yosef. He's not mentioning him. That's what happens. That's the reason why. But you're a bad man. In fact, if he provided this favor for you, you believed, because he saw the interpretation of the baker, that he was the one to be hanged, and now he relieved you, and he very clearly stated how you're going to be restored to your glory. How do you push it out of your mind? But now, in this week's parsha, the wine steward has no choice, because he feels his glory is going to be protected. Why is his glory being protected? To a degree, because he saves the day. Paro's dreaming. There's no one in his whole kingdom, all the dream interpreters, all the wise men, nobody could actually satisfy Paro. Paro has a sense this is not the interpretation of his dream. He has no choice. Now he understands Yosef, if he is summoned to interpret it, Yosef will give him the right, the real understanding of that dream. So ultimately, as much as he's a bad guy, his glory will be restored, it will be secured, because he made the day for Paro. Only due to the wine steward's suggestion that there's this person in the dungeon, that's why Paro now, his mind is put at ease. And especially, it turns out, he provided the person who will guarantee the country to survive. Because as it turned out, if there wouldn't have been the solution, they would have been confronted with this famine, and they were all starved to death. Not only were they secured, Egypt became the power of the world, that wealth-wise, that as we read later, that all the wealth of the world came to Egypt. They literally depleted the wealth of the world to that degree. But this is the inner workings of the Saramashkim. No, nobody wants competition, especially now. That's the way I always learned. So therefore now, how does the Saramashkim depict Yosef? In the most denigrating, deprecating way you could imagine. Eved, Ivri, the Saramashkim. He was a slave. He's an alien. He's a foreigner. He doesn't even speak our language. This is the way he depicts him to Paro. Why is he trying to paint such an ugly picture to Paro of who he is? Say he is. There's this person in prison. He was able to interpret dreams, and I believe he has the ability to interpret your dream. So the way I always learned, Saramashkim realized he had a problem. Yosef, who he is, And now he spent another 2 years in the dungeon because the Sarah Mashkim did not share with Paro that there was this person. And he had specifically requested, remember me, and mentioned me. That means Yosef suffered for 2 years because of the Sarah Mashkim. What level of revenge will Yosef take if he is put on this pedestal of power and given this power? What would you say? His life is worthless. He's the new power. Immediately. Minimally demote him. Instantaneous death. Maybe even torturing. Because Yosef suffered 2 years in prison in this dungeon because of Sarah Mashkim. So how does he depict him? Eved. He's a slave, as we'll see in a moment. In the protocols of Egypt, a slave cannot assume any position of power. That's number one. So he's trying to clip Yosef's wings. Ivri. He doesn't even speak our language. So, therefore, again, he can't be in a position of power. Thirdly, Nar. Nar means he's like an imbecile. He has an inferior intelligence. He has the ability to interpret dreams. But outside of that, he has no ability. So he denigrated him, deprecated him to a level that even if he's summoned and Paro sees he has this ability, in what context does he put this ability? He's a savant. Savant, you're a genius in one area, the rest, there's nothing to talk about in terms of the value, intelligence-wise. You know, we always say that first impressions are the most important. As a result of that, once he already paints this ugly picture or this pitiful picture of Yosef in the mind of Paro, when he sees him, he immediately is going to see him in that light. And be seeing him in that light, the man, he's not going to be able to get off the ground, literally, to that degree. So seemingly, Sarah Mashkim is justified to do this because his life's at stake. He's a bad guy. He should have said it immediately. But we said because he was egocentric and he didn't want this man to dictate his life, understanding his ability, he let him rot in the dungeon. He didn't realize and understand that someday he may have to summon him from the dungeon. But now if he's going to come from the dungeon to interpret Paro's dream, he has a major problem. Because Yosef will take a level of revenge which is unheard of. Therefore, he has to protect his own life. He has to go and paint and deprecate him in this ugly picture to put a limitation on his ability to rise to power. And yet, we'll see in a moment, Chazal depict him and say, the Sarah Mashkim, because even now that finally you're doing the right thing, Rishoyim, when evil people, when they do something, they do it in the most evil way. That Tevosim Shel Rishoyim, even the good, when a Russian does good, it's far from being perfect. You're already saying something about somebody who did you a favor. Why do you have to paint such an ugly picture? The answer is, Tovasum Shorim Ein Shlema. The good, even a Russian, when he does good, it's never complete. It's always actually reeking from bad stuff. So the question we asked in the past, this is self-preservation. Why are we faulting him to protect? He's saying this to protect his life. But yet, Chazal, this is how they paint the picture of the Sarah Mashkim. Not he's a bad person because he didn't mention him originally. But now that he's finally mentioning him, he's painting the ugliest picture and portraying him in the most deprecating way. You're doing already the right thing. Why don't you paint a proper picture? The answer is, as we said, here it's a question of self-preservation. Rashi the word. He referred to Nar Eved Ivri. Arurim Harishoim. Cursed are the evil. Shein Tovosum Shleimo. That even when they do good, it's not complete. Maskir b'loshem b'zoyin. He's mentioning him in the most deprecating way. Okay? The Torah is revealing over here what exactly a Rosh is. To appreciate, this is one of the characteristics of a Rosh. I mean, the wine steward, after all Yosef did for you, and you have no reason to say it as he's saying it. But despite that, he's saying it, you couldn't say it in a worse way. He couldn't depict Yosef in a more deprecating way. So from here we see, Arurim Mishoyim, cursed are the evil, that even when they do something good, it's never shleim, it's never complete. That's the takeaway. What was the dream of the Sarah Mashkin? He saw a vine, 3 vines, 3 branches on the vine, and he sees a bud. And the bud immediately starts developing into an unripened grape until it becomes a fully mature grape, which is bursting with juice. And how the Sarah Mashkin takes the grape, squeezes it into a cup, and serves the cup and squeezes it into a cup. Now, why, if all that Sarah Mashkin had to know that he's going to be reinstated to be the wine steward, to directly serve the king, why was it necessary to speak, to be seen in his dream, this bud developing into an unripened grape, to a fully ripened grape and squeezed? What was the value of seeing that? He could have seen 3 branches, which has a fully ripened grape. He picks the grape, squeezes it. That's it. What did he have to? What was the significance? Bud, unripened grape to a full mature grape. So Rav Chaim HaKadosh says that part of the dream had no relevance to the Sarah Mashkin. That part of the dream had to do with Yosef. Because in terms of the Sarah Mashkin being reinstated would have been enough. He picks 3 ripened grapes, squeezes them into a cup, serves the cup to Paro. The grapes picked from 3 branches is 3 days. Squeezed means in 3 days you can be reinstated to be the wine steward. What is this literally miraculous, immediate, expedited level of going from the bud to the grape to the fully bursting grape to be squeezed? That part of the dream had to do with Yosef. That Yosef himself, within 3 days, is rising to power. He himself is leaving the prison, is leaving the dungeon. You know what happened? He shared that with the Sarah Mashkin. Even though that part of the dream had nothing to do with the Sarah Mashkin. That had nothing to do with his reinstatement. So the Sarah Mashkin understood from Yosef's own interpretation, wasn't his evaluation of Yosef, what his capabilities, what they were, and what he's meant to be. But factually, he's destined to be the viceroy of Egypt. That was the dream. But Yosef didn't have to share that with him. All that had relevance to him, and that he shared it with him, because he believed that this man will be able to help him to actualize that part of the dream. That's where he failed. If he saw it as part of the dream, God's going to put you there. As we say on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, Mamlich Melochim V'lo Melucha. God coronates kings, but he's the king. If that's where you're meant to be, God will put you there. You don't need this heathen to be the intermediary for him to actually to deliver the message. It's going to happen. It said it had nothing to do with the Sarah Mashkin's evaluation of Yosef's capabilities, but rather, just as he saw the accuracy of the interpretation for himself, he understood the accuracy of the bud going from bud to grape to full mature grape to be squeezed. That was a reflection of Yosef. Therefore, Sarah Mashkin said, no way. This man is not rising to power. But again, the actual understanding of who the Sarah Mashkin, who he is, it's the same thing. Now, Yosef understood in 3 days when the Sarah Mashkin was not installed, was reinstated. Why wasn't he immediately summoned? He understood that Tsar Mashkin did not deliver the message. He understood. And he understood his mistake at that moment. If it didn't happen and it was supposed to happen, that means Yosef somehow messed up. All of a sudden, 2 years later, immediately they summon him. Yosef is no fool. Yosef understands exactly how the Tsar Mashkim had to depict him to protect his own flank. He understood exactly that he will be depicted in the most deprecating, denigrating way. And Yosef understands first impressions make the greatest impression. When Yosef is summoned and Paro says, I heard you have the ability to interpret dreams, what is Yosef's response? It's not me. It's not me, it's God. And again, Paro says, but you have this ability. He says, no, it's not me. It's God. I'm only the conduit for God's word. Because he understood. He didn't want for a moment the Sarah Mashkin depiction of him, that he's a savant who's able to interpret dreams. He's a vessel that this divine power communicates through him whatever has to be communicating. And even after when he interprets the dream of Paro, he gives the solution. And it's understandable that he is the solution himself. So whatever the Sarah Mashkin tried to impress upon Paro, to leave this indelible negative impression, he wiped it out immediately. Immediately. Because he proved it to be so baseless that not for a moment did he attribute it to himself, and immediately giving the solution. And he says, therefore, you should choose a man who has this capability, and this is the way it should be done. And Paro immediately says, he's the man. He says, have you ever seen anybody who has the spirit, the divine spirit in him? This is divine genius. This is not human genius. The answer is very simple. If he would have understood who Yosef was a tzaddik. Yosef was an ordinary person. Paro understood immediately that this is not just an ordinary person. This man has divine abilities. As he said, Ruach Elokimbo, this is the spirit of God. This is not human genius. He would have understood that he was a special person. And if he would have lived his life, that whatever happens, you experience, it's not attributed to someone else, but it's you. It happened to you because it was meant to happen to you. When Yosef over here, when he came out, did he have any animosity towards the Sarah Mashkin? The answer is no. He understood the reason why he spent 2 years in prison, because he failed. By relying on the heathen, it had nothing to do with Sarah Mashkin. It's Arur Mishoyim, the evil, because everything they process is within their own context of understanding. It's them. They succeed, it's them. They fail, it's attributed to themselves, or they blame others. But if he would have understood Yosef, there would have been no reason for him to depict him in this negative light. Arun Usham doesn't mean him alone. The evil, cursed, whenever they try, they convey something, they're part of the equation because they believe that they make the difference whether it happens or doesn't happen. Tzaddikim, they never attribute it to anybody but God himself. The way God wants to treat you, the way you have to be treated. Therefore, that's why they were showing. Well, that's only about that Sarah Mashkin's a bad guy. Arurim is showing. Evil people, whenever they process something, they process it through their own lens. What's their lens? Everything is me. My success is rooted in myself. My failing, somebody else messed up for me. Didn't allow me to succeed. That's why. Yosef, there was never a consideration for a moment that he was going to take revenge against the Sarah Mashkin. Because Yosef understood why he was there for another 2 years, because he failed in faith. And he used those 2 words, which he shouldn't have expressed those 2 words. He spent 2 years in prison because of those 2 words.
Well, I mean,